All right, welcome everybody. This is the in-class lecture. This is not a homework video for intensive agriculture. And the goal by the end of this is to explain the difference between different types of intensive agriculture. So we're focusing on small-scale agriculture. So first off, we started the class looking at this picture of the terraced rice fields in, I think, Southeast Asia. And we had to describe the agriculture in this picture. And there's a couple ways that you can do this. Yes, it's intensive agriculture right away. Second, you could call it labor intensive because we know that generally in these areas of intensive agriculture, with terracing, that we're going to see people using hand tools. And finally, the type of agriculture generally associated with this is subsistence agriculture, right? Because we know that this exists in this type of form. Remember that agricultures can have multiple characteristics that you would describe them with or attach to them. So what I wanted to do before we even jumped into this, these are the agricultures we have to learn about. Market gardening, plantation agriculture, mixed crop and livestock, Mediterranean, shifting cultivation, pastoral nomadism, ranching, and plantation. Today we are only focusing on the intensive agriculture types of agriculture. This was a video explaining
what looks like
the purpose of commercial farming and how much we see it.
Is not. There is an illusion of diversity. There are only a few companies involved, and there are only a few crops involved. What really surprised me most as I followed that food back to its source, I kept ending up in the same place, and that was a cornfield in Iowa. So much of our industrial food turns out to be clever rearrangements of corn. Corn has conquered the world in a lot of ways. I mean, it is a remarkable plant. 100 years ago, a farmer in America could grow maybe 20 bushels of corn on an acre. Today, 200 bushels is no problem. That's an astonishing achievement, for which breeders deserve credit, for which fertilizer makers deserve credit, for which pesticide makers all deserve credit.
In the United States today, 30% of our land base is being planted to corn. That's largely driven by government policy that, in effect, allows us to produce corn below the cost of production. The truth of the matter is we're paid to overproduce, and it was caused by these large multinational interests. The reason our government's promoting corn is the Cargills, the ADMs, Tyson, Smithfield, they have an interest in purchasing corn below cost of production. They use that interest and that extensive amount of money they have to lobby Congress to give us the kind of farm bills we now have.
The Farm Bill, which should really be called the Food Bill, codifies the rules of the entire food economy. Farm policy is always focused on these commodity crops because you can store them. We encourage farmers to grow as much corn as they could grow, to get big, to consolidate. We subsidized farmers by the bushel.
We produced a lot of corn, and they came up with uses for it.
And this was an example to show that corn is in everything and how the effects of commercial agriculture. Pretty incredible. I can't believe corn is in all this stuff. It's crazy when you think about it. Who would have thought that so many things would have corn in it? Anyway, so let's talk about our first type of intensive agriculture. And it would be mixed crop and livestock. And what it sounds like, exactly in the name, it's a mix between growing crops and raising livestock. Now, I use the abbreviation MC/L because farmers in these spaces that have mixed crop and livestock, the most common type of agriculture in the US, or one of the most common, they don't have space for these animals, these cows, for them to go around and graze. That would be this huge field. So instead, they grow crops specifically to feed those animals, generally corn. Now, as a result, it's a lot of corn, and it's corn that is used as animal feed. It's not the corn that we can eat. But yeah, most corn in the United States goes directly to feeding cows in these mixed crop and livestock types of agriculture. And if we look on this choropleth map, we see where corn is produced, and we see overwhelmingly that it is produced in the United States, and then we use that to then raise cattle. Our next one is market gardening or truck farming. Truck farming can also be called commercial gardening. It's the form of agriculture that deals with growing fruits and vegetables, and we're very familiar with this one because it is here in Florida. It's in the U.S. Southeast. We're used to seeing citrus being grown, oranges, strawberries, blueberries, all these types of things. Our next type of intensive agriculture is plantation. Now this one's a little different. With plantation agriculture, it's different than other forms of commercial agriculture, which, by the way, all of these that we talk about are pretty much commercial forms of agriculture, unless I state otherwise. Now, plantations are interesting because it is a type of commercial agriculture, but it takes place in the developing world. And the thing is, plantations are generally owned by companies in the developed world, or MDCs. And what they do is that they buy this land in the developing world. They hire workers in the developing world to grow this food for them, and then they buy it. So these companies are taking advantage of the cheap labor and the cheap land. We've talked about this before when we've referenced neocolonialism. We've talked about it when we talk about the core periphery theory, the idea that these countries are trapped selling these same goods they've always sold since colonialism. We've seen this as an example in the chocolate film, the idea that there's people in these countries growing these cacao beans and never having chocolate in their life. This is exactly what we're talking about. Now, plantations generally focus on growing 1 to 2 crops, and most of the time, 9 times out of 10, it's going to be a cash crop. Cash crops are things that we love to pay for and we love having, but we don't need. Common plantation crops, cash crops, include bananas, coffee, cacao, tea, coconuts, palm oil, the things I've listed here. But cash crops can also be things that we can't consume, things like cotton, rubber, and tobacco. But needless to say that these plantations are in the developing world growing things that we love to enjoy but do not need. Our next type of intensive agriculture is Mediterranean agriculture. It focuses on growing fruits, vegetables, and herbs, similar to commercial gardening, except this time it's going to be more Mediterranean-based stuff. And I know that you're like, well, Mr. Bear, what is Mediterranean-based food? Well, when we talk about these different types of agricultures, think about the foods that are associated in those countries around those areas. On the Mediterranean is Italy. Italy makes a lot of Italian food. Think of Italian cuisine. If you think of the Palestinian food, Arabic food is very similar with the different herbs, fruits, and vegetables. These are the things that you should be thinking about when we talk about Mediterranean food. Tomatoes. Suddenly I can't think of any food. Olives. Grapes, tomatoes, I have them listed here, and I'm sure I've listed more in class. Now, even though it's called Mediterranean agriculture, it does not take place only in the Mediterranean. What we have to understand with agriculture is that it's based on climate. So, if you need to find a place that has a similar type of agriculture, look for places with similar climates. Now, if you look on the map, we'll see there's 4 places circled, and they all have similar climates. They're coastal places. I think it's hot, wet summers and hot, dry summers and cool, wet winters is what makes Mediterranean. But if you look, and if you understand that, if you look at the equator, if you flip the place over the equator, we have the same climates based on how far away they are from the equator. So we realize that these 4 places in the world can produce the same types of agriculture as in Mediterranean.